So good afternoon, you guys. I'm outside, so some of my neighbors are honking like assholes, so that you may hear that in the background. But I would want to talk about what Bryan Alvarez said about All Elite Wrestling. And he did say that, AEW cannot be booking for the Sickos anymore. And what he was really saying was that, there's a lot of just, recaps that need to happen, and then you also need to contextualize things, and you also have to get into a pattern of not assuming that everybody remembers everything, or some things that are a little esoteric. For example, there's two things he talked about Jay White and Christian Cage, and he was saying that there was a match between them, and there wasn't a lot of promotion of why they're having a match. You actually heard Excalibur, if I'm saying his name correctly, just he actually was talking about why they're fighting during the match, really. So obviously, it's like what I said, it's a little bit bad because Jay White and especially Christian Cage is a great promo person, so why would you do something like not have him speak on the microphone or anything like that? So he was saying that obviously during the dialogue, then you heard things like, okay, they're beefing with each other because Christian Cage cost Jay White an opportunity in the Owen Hart tournament. And then also they had the match in London, like the triple threat ladder match. The triple ladder match for the trios titles. And this was a match that happened, I believe, this week or last week. So it's about 2 months removed from, about a month and a half removed from the All In show in London. So definitely, when you have a wrestling show, you need to recap these things because most people are not going to remember. You have to contextualize. And then it's also like what I've said, that they've really been doing a lot better with AEW. I am very, very proud of the promos. But there are some things that need to take first precedent. If you have a main event match, obviously the people in the main event should be having promos and all that stuff. The other thing that I will say is, definitely, this is one of the reasons why I think AEW would do better as a 3-hour show. If they actually include more story and more context in a 3-hour show, I actually think they would have a better product. Like I said, it's story than action. Not action and no story, because action and no story is pornography. All story is just, reading a book, really. And action and story is professional wrestling. You got to combine both those. And then, as he said, obviously, and AEW has been working really hard on this, is that they're not all about having match after match after match after match. Because, you can't do that in wrestling, because there's no context, there's no story, there's nothing that captivates you, there's nothing that says, oh, I want to be behind this guy or that guy. They're doing a lot better at all the wrestlers just talking and being more driven on the microphone. I'm very proud of that. They need to keep doing that. But they also just need to have logic holes fixed. I really, really think that if I was running AEW, I would have story editors. And what these story editors will do is that they'll watch the show and they'll look at all the storylines and they'll say, okay, this is what's going to happen, but we actually are going to take the idea and we're going to establish some context and make things a lot better, really. A lot of my fantasy booking, a lot of the things that I've said about AEW with the fantasy booking, a lot of it has been just refixing some stories. Like, for example, I was talking about Dustin Rhodes becoming the ROH champion. And I was saying that in order to get there, you should make Chris Jericho the ROH champion all the way until All In. And then what you do is that you actually have him go through a bunch of opponents, and then you get him and Dustin, and then maybe what you do the next year and all in 2026 is that you have Sammy Guevara versus Dustin for the Ring of Honor champion. Then you say something that the Ring of Honor champion is going to make. Is going to be defended at All In every single year. And then the other part of it is that All In's going to become a developmental territory. So sometimes in my storytelling, I kind of almost do the story editing type of thing, really, where I would take something that AEW is doing, see the problems in it, and make a story that fixes many of the problems, really. But they probably need story editors to kind of look at how they're doing the matches and saying, okay, well, this is what you have. But we need to tweak how you do the matches and the storytelling within the matches so things make sense. Oh, well, here's the show, and here's who you want to push. Here's who's talking. Here's all the matches. So what can we do to kind of like take all that and edit some things around, really? You do something like you get rid of the Orange Cassidy squash match or one of the squash matches you saw on Collision, and then you may have maybe a little bit more context of something else that happened, really. So there really needs to be a little bit more continuity and editing of stories, and definitely storylines that can fix a couple of problems. But I think with all that said, really, with Bryan Alvarez, I do agree that obviously if you just book match after match, or if you assume everybody knows who somebody is or knows why a feud is happening and that's not explained, people are not going to be interested because there's nothing that captivates you. For example, like they had a match between AR Fox and Ricochet. To me, that should have been like the 9 o'clock main event. And they could have said something like, okay, AR Fox and Ricochet, they've been feuding for 20 years. And then you kind of show, clips of their matches that they had 20 years ago and other things like that. And then you have promos of AR Fox saying something like, you know what, I want to make a statement. I want to be on the roster. I want to do something with this company. Getting through Ricochet is going to put me on the map. They have the match. AR Fox loses. You say something like, okay, well, AR Fox is now banging. So now we got to do something with him. That's how you do it. You don't do something like say, okay, AR Fox and Ricochet have been wrestling, and then they're just wrestling on television. And that's when you announce it, when you could have done the promo and the hype thing, and then ask AR Fox backstage, do you actually want to be in this company? Do you actually want to have a bunch of matches? And do you actually want to go somewhere? And then you create a storyline, because not only do you have AR Fox losing to Ricochet, you actually have something with him afterwards, and he's a good wrestler. So I really think that, maybe the hyping of matches during the show, especially main event matches, I think is really important. They've done that in many cases, like this weekend with Moxley appearing at the beginning of Dynamite, and at the beginning of Collision, and at the end of Collision, and then also just opening Collision with a match. All of that I'll give them credit for. So sometimes they have it and sometimes they don't. That's fair to say. And but if you don't have it at all, it's going to pander to a very, very small audience, and that's not good, really, because it's just people that says that are going to be unapologetic, really, So that's kind of the point, really. But I appreciate what Bryan Alvarez says, really. I think that if you're going to have something that's a main event, you have to make sure people understand what it's about, why it's happening, and make sure that people understand the context. Major storylines need that. He was also talking about Wheeler Yuta, and with Wheeler Yuta, exact same thing. Why is Wheeler Yuta beating up Bryan Danielson? One thing they could have done was they could have watched the footage of the prior show and said, okay, well, he's beating up Bryan Danielson because Bryan Danielson was attacking Jon Moxley, and he wasn't really protecting Wheeler Yuta when he was getting his ass kicked. So Wheeler Yuta's kind of like, you know what, I'm sick and tired of being Bryan Danielson's bitch, really. He's a glory hog. In the end of the day, he cares about himself, really, So that's all good, like, context, really. So, when you have major angles, when you have main events, you always have to kind of, like, make sure that there's a good story that makes the people captivating. They have to speak in the ring. They have to have video promos when it is going to be captivating. And when you're hyping up big matches, you have to make sure they're captivating with a hype, and then with the match itself, really. Like, one thing I'll say is, this pisses me off like a motherfucker, is you have Mark Briscoe, one hell of a talker, and Chris Jericho, one hell of a talker and a veteran, and these two niggers don't actually just go in the ring and actually have a fucking promo. That's fucking stupid. Because could you imagine them having a promo in the ring together? No, they have to do video packages. More than likely it's because they're both too fucking lazy. You have Mark Briscoe, who doesn't stand up for himself, and want to go to the next level. He wants to be the ROH champion when he should be the AEW champion, and he has the voice and the charisma to do that. And then you have Chris Jericho, who's too busy filming Terrifier 3 and doing Fozzy, that he doesn't want to do video promos. You got, if I was Tony Khan, I'd be like, okay, you motherfuckers, you need to have a promo in the ring or you're both fired, because, you both have potential and this could be something, Mr. Kung Fu, Redneck Kung Fu having a Redneck Kung Fu promo against a little bit of the bubbly promo. Another great example. How much more would that feud mean if they actually had promos and you actually had all that craziness together, really? So sometimes, so wrestlers speaking up and moving forward and advocating and building themselves upwards, they've done that in AEW, and they're actually increasing that, and I really, really appreciate that. But in some ways, when you have your match, your box office match for your weekly show, Christian versus Jay White, you have to have promos, you have to have video packages, you have to make sure that matters. And then you do that next week with Briscoe and Chris Jericho. If you want to end the night that way, or even if that's a 9 o'clock main event, you better have them in the ring at the beginning of the show talking about all that. And or you'd have them appear second. You have the opening that establishes the context. That's the second thing, they talk about it in the ring. And then they have the match later on tonight. And then you're all set, really. For the Halloween show, you're going to have Shelton Benjamin and Sammy Guevara. Yes, you talked a little bit on Collision. They should have like a promo together in the ring next week, or they should do it at the beginning of Dynamite, and then maybe that could be Shelton Benjamin and Sammy Guevara, really. So contextualize, hype, build up, have characters and have captivating stuff for your box office weekly matches, and that just means there's a pay-per-view box office, which means you have a match that you do for the pay-per-view that you build up, like Swerve versus Hangman. Excellent. That was really done excellent. You burned down Swerve's house. That got people to spend money on the pay-per-view. With Jay White and Christian Cage, that's a great example of having something, but not doing the build or the other things that will actually make it really important, actually go somewhere. So, there's definitely a lot to be said.